The discovery of the atomic bomb in the 1940s has given humanity a question the Fallout series has strived to answer. If ever there would come a day when mankind possessed the capacity to destroy himself, what would come of us? Some predict that this is where our story will end. Yet what if it was only another bloody chapter of human history? You've experienced the Fallout series in your own way, but want to learn more about its story. Well, to get to the heart of the story, you have to go back to the beginning.
This presentation brought to you by Vault-Tec. Here's what you need to know about leaving the vault. Be sure to remember these basic rules. Rule number 1, line up in an orderly fashion. Rule number 2, use protective eyewear. Years of living in the vault can make the eyes sensitive to natural sunlight. Without protective eyewear, extreme eye damage could result. Once outside the vault, be prepared to live life anew with help from the Garden of Eden Creation Kit, or GEC. Use the GEC to create the new world you've been waiting for. Results may vary.
Tamriel.
On October 23, 2077, the nightmares became all too real when the Great War commenced. Blinding light ignited the sky, and people ducked and took cover as they had been taught, cowering under whatever they could, hoping that if they kept their eyes closed and remained still, that the merciless flames would pass them by. They hid beneath desks at school, under cars on the street, and behind desks at work. Perhaps a few were in their beds when the flash appeared on the horizon, and perhaps they drew their blankets over their head like children, hoping that the searing pain was just a bad dream. The ballyhooed tactic of duck and cover proved ineffective against armies that no longer cared about winning. Mutually self-assured destruction was the goal, and the American and Chinese exceeded it in spades. Hundreds of millions of people lost their lives within minutes, and billions more died over the days to come as radioactive fallout settled over entire continents. The fallout muddied the oceans, clouded the sky, and sunk deep into the soil. Those who happened to be in the right place at the moment the bombs fell managed to survive. These lucky few formed the primitive tribal societies that struggled for survival in the years immediately following the war. Hidden from those tribal bands were another group of survivors, those who had been selected for Project Safe House. 100,000 people fortunate enough to have been offered shelter inside impregnable survival shelters called vaults, created by the Vault-Tec Corporation. The first vaults opened again a few years after the war, and their inhabitants slowly spread throughout the wasteland. By now, tales of the vaults have spread from coast to coast, although not many people alive today have actually been inside one. At the height of pre-war civilization, the government and a few powerful corporations knew that an apocalypse was brewing, so they used their finest technology to create vast subterranean bunkers that could withstand a nuclear blast, a meteor impact, global flooding, or other likely disasters. The general public wasn't entirely convinced that their end was nigh. Otherwise, there would have been a greater demand for vaults. When the war started, there were only about 100 of them scattered across America, and many held less than 1,000 people they were intended to hold. Those who were smart enough or lucky enough to be inside one when the end came were protected from the devastation by airtight steel doors, thick walls of concrete, and over 200 feet of soil. The fine engineers at Vault-Tec designed their bunkers to run independently for 10 years and even more. Geothermal power, hydroponic farms for growing food, and a water purification system so efficient vault residents could fool themselves into thinking they weren't drinking their own urine. The designers made the vaults as homey as possible despite the steel-clad walls. The cafeterias were designed to look a little like roadside diners, and vault dwellers could close their eyes and imagine that they were eating a plate of Blamco mac and cheese. Shiny new medical robots tended to those who suffered from mundane illnesses and injuries, while on the surface world, billions died from radiation sickness, burns, starvation, and violence. Housing wasn't as spacious as on the surface, but there was plenty of room for several hundred people, and the vaults that held a few thousand or more could work out fair ways to share their bunks for a while. Each vault was run by a leader called the Overseer, who ran the underground community from a command center deep inside the complex. The Overseers were usually selected for their exceptional leadership skills. The vaults were comfortable enough, but after 10 years the radiation had gone down in most parts of the country, and the vault dwellers expected to head back up into the sunlight and begin rebuilding their flawed societies. Vault-Tec had prepared them for anything that might await on the surface. The vaults had all the research material that they would need to rebuild America, including the entire Library of Congress on holodisk, plus 101 recipes on how to cook rats. Those who have walked the wasteland know that the world isn't a kind place. Sometimes people think of the pre-war days as a golden age, a time when people were better to each other. But there wouldn't have been an apocalypse if that were true. No, people were cruel and callous to each other even back then, and the folks who ran Vault-Tec were no exception. We've all heard of Vault City, a paradise built by the people who emerged from Vault 8 using a pre-war device called the Garden of Eden Creation Kit. They represent what the world could have been like if only Project Safehouse had been on the up and up. Unfortunately, Vault-Tec had some ulterior motives, and vaults like Vault 8 were rare. The poor fools who weathered the fallout in Vault-Tec's nuclear shelters were the control groups in horrible experiments. Keep people nice and safe for 10 years, then open up and build a new Garden of Eden? That happened a few times out of 100 vaults. Most vaults were designed to deliberately malfunction as part of an experiment to see just how far the human mind could be pushed before it snapped. Unbeknownst to the vault dwellers, Vault-Tec and some elite factions of the government had their own shelters far away from the public vaults. These elite wanted to learn how to rebuild society by observing the inhabitants of the defective vaults. Some of the vaults were designed so that their inhabitants would be trapped in isolation for generations. Think 10 years locked in a vault is a rough trip? Try 80 or 200. There could even be people still sealed inside hidden vaults that haven't opened yet. Other vaults had experiments that only a lunatic could conceive. 1,000 men with only one woman. 1,000 women with just one man. Or even one man trapped all alone in his own vault with nothing but a crate of puppets for company. One vault even seemed like it was designed as a personal playground for a sadistic Vault-Tec employee who just wanted some poor souls to suffer forever in a virtual reality where he was a god in a world of his own making. You might be wondering if the vault dwellers ever figured out what was happening to them. Did any of them learn that their lives meant nothing to Vault-Tec, that they had become no more than lab rats in a mad experiment? Maybe the inhabitants thought that their problems were accidental supply errors. Or maybe they realized what had happened and cursed Vault-Tec with their dying breaths. Who knows if these experiments turned up any useful information for the sons of whores who devised them. But all the suffering wasn't for nothing. Many vaults did open, even if later than expected. Some of the people who emerged went on to do great things for the wasteland. Parts of what used to be the capital of this land even has fresh water thanks to some helpful vault dwellers and technology scavenged from the old vaults. Looters hoping to uncover riches and pre-war supplies should be wary of the vaults, though. Project Safehouse has brought some troubles to the wasteland, too. The super mutants, for instance, are connected to the corporation behind the vaults. Just remember, Wanderer, it isn't worth getting killed by mutants just because you heard about a stash of fancy lad snack cakes inside some old vault's pantry. There's a whole city of ghouls who came from one of the vaults. Sometimes you'll meet a ghoul who claims to have been alive back before the bombs fell. Don't pay them no mind, unless they're wearing a Vault 12 jumpsuit. That vault, the door never sealed up all the way. Maybe it malfunctioned, or maybe it was more of Vault-Tec's shenanigans. But the people inside got just the right dose of radiation to turn into the very first ghouls. The idea of a piece of the old world sealed fresh is just too romantic an idea for some people to resist. Of course, most wanderers have the sense to stay away from the vaults. If you really can't help yourself, though, there's a city called New Vegas where people can get a look at the inside of a real live vault without having to worry about mutants, ghouls, or old security bots. Right in the middle of the New Vegas Strip is an old vault that they turned into a hotel so that travelers have some place to sleep while they waste their caps boozing, gambling, and whoring. Tourists can even grab a Vault-Tec lunchbox in mint condition or a stylish vintage Vault 21 jumpsuit. We don't know how many vaults are still out there undiscovered. They're hidden well, and Vault-Tec like keeping their secrets. Maybe a few of these unknown vaults still have people living inside, the descendants of that first group of survivors. Or maybe there's a thriving society buried right under our feet that doesn't even wonder what the outside world is like. Sooner or later, though, that door has to open. Even the fine makers of the vaults couldn't build a system that will contain humanity forever. And when those vault dwellers take their first steps out into the bright sunlight and feel the sands of the wasteland beneath their feet, they'll find the world has changed a lot in 200 years. It's a big, mean world. Their overseer is small potatoes compared to some of the factions that run things now. There are those who view the vaults as candy-shelled morsels filled with treats. Technology is nice, but the vaults held something even more precious. A pure gene pool uncontaminated by radiation or exposure to virus-borne mutagens. There are plenty of interested parties who want to get their hands on a fresh supply of pure-strain humans who have yet to be exposed to the harsh wasteland. But that is a story for another day.